Without further ado, I am going to bring our speaker up, Mr. Earl Glynn. Welcome to Pachyderm.
Thank you, Carl, for this opportunity. Just a little bit about me. I'm originally from Wamego, Kansas, in Pottawatomie County. I spent some time at K-State, and I spent my career in research jobs, mostly in the Kansas City area, but I was in Washington, D.C. for 4 years. And so while I was having a lot of fun on these research projects, I was kind of politically asleep. I wasn't paying attention. I tended to trust the press way too much. And so by 1996, I kind of woke up because there was this guy named Bill Clinton that I just couldn't take. And so he's my motivation. Anytime I need motivation to do anything, I just watch videos of Bill Clinton. But by 2002, I was active in some campaigns and noticed that Phil Klein was supposed to win his attorney general race by 5 or 6 points and barely won by 0.5 percentage point. And before that contest, there were all sorts of ads all over the air against Phil right at the end. And so that was in the dark days of open records in Kansas. That was 2002 was 4 years before those things were put online. And so I figured out how to do open records requests to the Secretary of State's office to find out what are all the PACs in Kansas, then which PACs were likely the most responsible for that. And so anyway, several months later, I found out that the Pro-Can-Do PAC down here in Wichita that Dr. Tiller sponsored spent more money against Phil Klein for Attorney General than Phil's opponent spent against Phil Klein for Attorney General. So I thought, well, that might just be a news story. Well, it took me 6 months of harassing people around the state to publish that. So finally, the Lawrence Journal-World did pick it up. But in that process, I learned, well, the press really isn't interested in finding out the truth. You can lead them right to the story, and they just aren't going to do it. And so I started blogging. And so Governor Sebelius was one of my favorite things to blog, people to blog about at that time. And I just enjoyed annoying her by finding out things that weren't in the public sphere at that time. But by 2008, I wrote a story in March of that year that rank ordered all the political PACs in Kansas. And it seems like 6 months later, my employer got wind that, well, that's kind of related to some of the guy that's funding what we were doing. And so at that point, I was given an opportunity to find a new opportunity. Trying to be as nice as I can about it. And luckily, my blogging turned into, my hobby of a blogger turned into a job for 5 years. And so I got to work with Paul Sutar as Paul and I were the Kansas watchdog for about 4 years. And so Paul was in Wichita, I was in Kansas City. We both met in Topeka quite a bit. And we wrote all sorts of stories at that time. Well, I really was a researcher, and so 5 years later, I finally found a job that I wanted. And so I kind of went back into, I was in academic settings, but I kind of kept a low profile just so I could get enough work long enough to retire. So that finally succeeded in retiring 2 years ago, so now I'm kind of open to doing what I want to do. And when I was paying attention, but I wasn't paying attention that much during the last 8 years. And so I was amazed how much I found in the first 6 months. And so that's really started what turned into this talk. So today I'm going to take you just on a couple slides about progressive activism. They have a much longer range approach than we do. They're already looking at probably the next 2026, 2028, and they've already got their expenditures lined up for this year. So we need to do a better job at that. But then there's some examples from Kansas of dark money. I'm going to talk about 3 examples of dark money in Kansas and then 4 examples of nonprofits. And there's dark money in nonprofits too, and we'll get back into that. I'll give you my take on the impact of what this is doing in Kansas, and then there'll be a short take-home message. So clear back in 2009, there was a meeting. The title of the meeting was the National Progressive and Party Infrastructure, and they put together a plan to build, they call it capacity building, different things that would help them in elections. Because 10 to 15 years ago, our side, the right side, we were ahead of them in what would be called dark money now in financing. But they put this plan in place, and they're still executing. There's 4 circles on here of groups that are still very, very active in the political world, and some of you may have heard about them, some not. Catalyst is a for-profit company that has collected voter data since before 2010. So their data scientists have data about everybody. They collect data about voters, they collect commercial data, they collect any data they can, and they make that available to basically lefty causes. And the things that always bothered me about Catalyst was they were giving nonprofits. Why did nonprofits need voter data? And so that's one of the things that came up that I didn't understand. And then because I like to analyze data, the name of this next group called the Stowers Institute always kind of intrigued me. Well, if you look those people up, they share the street address of the AFL-CIO in Washington, D.C., just north of the White House. So this is an AFL-CIO, it's a union thing. But they do social science studies on what makes elections work. And they do consulting using the data from Catalyst to do things that our side just isn't doing these days. So then on the right side of this, we have the Democracy Alliance, which is a group of, it's like a subscription. You have to commit to spending so much per year and directing money in particular ways. So these are just donors that are making things happen. And then the one, and even at that time, they put it in the largest circle, America Votes. These people are getting people to vote. This is why Joe Biden didn't need to campaign other than from his basement in Delaware in the last cycle, because these people are getting the votes they're getting the ballots to the polls, whether the voters go to the polls or not. That's a different story. And we're going to be talking about something called integrated voter engagement, which is actually, Wichita is the center of where this is happening. But this thing called integrated voter engagement turned Colorado from a red state to a blue state about 15 years ago. And so this is something that we're going to talk about that more, but it's not a new topic, but our side is not picking up on what they're doing. We need to at least push back, do something to reproduce what they're doing. So when I retired, I started making a list of all the lefty groups in Kansas because I couldn't really keep track of all of them. There's a lot of them. So the ones in yellow here, which you probably can't read from that far back, but the ones in yellow are the most active. But some of the newer ones that you may not be that be aware of, one of them is called the Middle of the Road PAC. When they filed their report in January, they raised almost $1 million, and they have $900,000 in cash. And this is one that Governor Kelly is associated with. So I don't know what they're doing, but that's a lot of money for this early in the season. And the other one that I want to highlight, one of the Wichita's TV stations did a good story about this. It's a group called United Kansas that wants to become a designated political party in Kansas. And what they want to do is they want to have something called fusion voting, where a voter may appear multiple times because it's the Fusion Party candidate and the Democratic Party candidate, or the Fusion candidate. So that's still, the Secretary of State's still sorting that out, and that probably could end up in the courts here yet this year. So that's but there's just all sorts of groups that are doing all sorts of things. Okay, so let's talk about dark money in Kansas. And again, I'm going to give you 3 examples. And I try to put numbers on all these things. I didn't really have numbers on everything, so in the past I didn't try to that. But so, for example, Protect Our Care ran in 2022 560 TV ads in the Kansas City market, and they spent $370,000 doing that just to help Sharice Davids, who was unopposed. And they did that in April through June before the election. Like, why were they doing that? There's a group, and I don't know exactly what they're doing, called Rural Democracy Initiative. They spent almost $750,000 in 2020 to 2023. It's a lot of money. And then Kansas Values Institute, they're like the grandparents, grandmother, grandfather. They spent $23 million in 2022. That's a staggering amount. And they spent more than the Schmidt campaign and the Kelly campaign did combined. And since 2011, they've spent $39 million. Our side just doesn't have those resources. So anyway, getting back to the ads in Kansas City, I was retired maybe 1 month, and every news story or every news show I watched, there was this ad from Protect Our Care to call Sharice Davids to tell her to thank you for fighting to lower health care costs. And if you look at Protect Our Care, it's a vague enough term, you're not likely to go anywhere with Google to find who that is. If you go to the Kansas Secretary of State's office, it's not a registered business in Kansas. If you go to the Attorney General's office, it's not a registered charity. So just what is Protect Our Care? Well, what you can do now, easier than you could do maybe 10 years ago, is anything that you see on TV like that, there's an FCC public inspection file that's online now. You used to have to go to the TV station to find it. So I went to these online sites and found 2 of these TV stations gave me enough information that said, this is some Washington, D.C. group, and I knew the street address of it. So then if you go to the Washington, D.C., the equivalent of their Secretary of State, they have all their businesses listed there. Protect Our Care is a trade name of a group called the 1630 Fund. So you probably learn less. That they just make this really confusing and really hard to follow on purpose. So then what is the 1630 Fund? Well, maybe, maybe not. You've heard of this Arabella Advisors Group, and so they're like the king of dark money these days. And I highly recommend this book that came out just 2 weeks ago called Arabella by Scott Walter from the Capital Research Group. This is an excellent book, and they go into great detail of what's going on. But the Arabella family of funds here, they have 3 501c3s and 2 501c4s. They all now share the same address in Washington, D.C. One of them had a different address. And they're just very, very active in politics. If you go back to 2020, in the 2020 presidential election, these 4 groups, they've added the 5th one since then, spent $733 million basically on elections. It's just a staggering amount. And remember we talked about that America Votes that was in their plan from 2009? American Votes got 174 million of the 184 million for voter registration. So they're just finding people and getting them registered to vote everywhere in the country. Now of that 733 million, Kansas only saw a paltry 1.8 million. And then since then, again, they're very active in even-numbered years and even more active in presidential years. So these 4 groups, or these 5 groups now of Arabella groups, have spent $6 million in Kansas since 2020. And some of these groups off to the right, I've labeled them IVE. Again, this is this integrated voter engagement, which we'll be talking about. So some of those people are involved in that. And these little boxes like that are look at those as bullet points, but there's a whole article online that gives you great detail about any of those things. So anyway, I'm going to go on to Rural Democracy Initiative. And this is a case where, okay, we saw that Arabella used trade names to hide. They had dozens and dozens of different names that they used to hide who really was behind it. Well, instead of a trade name, and maybe some attorney can tell me why they have to register as a trade name, they can just say, we have a project, and this is one of our projects that we're fiscally funding, and they will give the name of that project out, but usually not their original name. So in this particular case, Arabella Advisors put out an impact statement for 2020 and said that the Heartland Fund was really part of their Windward Fund. So it's just name confusion all over again. And something called the Rural Victory Fund was really part of their 1630 Fund. So again, they just totally confused what's going on. So Heartland Fund and Rural Victory Fund are really just projects of this Arabella group. So it gets really confusing really fast. But Arabella, to their credit, will at least tell me something about what they're doing in their yearly impact studies. So in 2022, off to the right here, they admitted that their goal was to shift elections in small towns and rural areas by 3 to 5%. So their focus is in the non-urban areas of Kansas to do that all over the state. Now, I don't know if you can read the map on the left, but they're saying that Kansas is it's an important opportunity or threat. Is why they're operating in Kansas now. I think it's an opportunity because there's some groups I'm going to show you that are funding the money. I don't think it's a threat, but so they're funding. I don't know if you've heard of the name Loudlight. They're a very active group registering young voters, like under 30. They're very active on college campuses. And there's something here in Wichita. I guess the neighboring movement it's in south central Wichita. There's some groups working on integrated voter engagement here. So, but anyway, Rural Democracy Initiative has spent $700,000 on getting lefties registered to vote in the state of Kansas. Now, I only found out about Rural Democracy Initiative quite by accident when they're somehow tied to something called Vote ER, which we're going to talk about more in a minute. And so the Community Health Center of Southeast Kansas in Pittsburgh decided, with some funding indirectly from the Rural Democracy Initiative, which again is the Arabella, so it's just dark money flowing down to there. They spent money to send out text messages in the value of them both constitutional amendment in August 2022. So it's weird how these things get interconnected in ways that you don't understand. So you just have to keep following the lead. So the last few talks I've given the next dark money thing in Kansas is Kansas Values Institute. And the last few talks I've given, I said, I don't really know what they're doing this year. I did write a story in 2022 before the election saying that most of their money that I could find was coming from teachers' unions, abortion-related organizations, dark money sources, and the Democratic Governors Association. And then I identified that at that time, about $750,000 was coming from the Arabella groups. And so so I don't know if you know, the ads were all over the place. They had ads against Derek Schmidt and Fort Kelly just all over the airwaves in the Kansas City area, and I'm guessing in Wichita too. So I was really curious about how much money they spent. What you can, an IRS 990 is a tax form they have to fill out, and at minimum from that tax form, I'm going to find out how much money they had and how much money they spent. I'm not going to necessarily get their donors. I'll get some of them maybe from other sources, but I really want to know how much money they spent. In a December 2022 meeting at the Stowers Institute in Lawrence, what they were asked, they had all the campaign managers from the gubernatorial candidates and then Kansas Values Institute. And the guy asked, well, how much money did you spend? And so the gal said, well, they say we spent $17.5 million. Well, I want to see that on an IRS 990 because that's more official. And so in November of 2023, I sent them an email saying, I would like to get your tax filing. They have to give it to me within 30 days, but they said, no, we're going to file an extension. So I waited till February, I guess it was, and I handed her again, and she finally gave in and sent it to me. So that's where I found out the bottom line in here, which is kind of hard to read, but they raised and spent $23 million in the 2022 campaign. It's just mind-boggling, and this is where you can see the numbers are very high in gubernatorial years. So they will spend quite a bit of money this year compared to last year, but less. They'll spend less this year than in the next governor's race. But they've been around since 2011. And I can only find like 25% of their money. And so right now it's basically the same story as before. It's ties to the Democratic Governors Association since the governor's race is up in the gubernatorial years. There's a little bit of dark money. There's teachers unions, and then Emily's List is another pro-abortion group. Now the interesting one here is the Kansans for Constitutional Freedom. They were the big taker, the big leader opposing the Value Them Both election. And so they gave them $160,000. But guess what? Arabella's 1630 Fund and North Fund gave millions of dollars to Kansas for Constitutional Freedom. So these things they aren't grassroots efforts, they aren't local money, they're coming from out of state. So now we're going to go on to nonprofits. So basically your dark money, if there's no way to trace where your money's coming from. And so this Arabella group, you can give them money as a donor advised funds, and then they will take it and spend it for you in ways that you kind of directed them to environment, or you can give them general ideas about what you want to spend. With a nonprofit, so this is like churches or even nonprofits, they don't have to disclose the donors that give directly to there unless it's another nonprofit. And so I will only find out the money that's going to a nonprofit if another nonprofit gives it to them. So if you're George Soros and you give somebody a huge amount of money directly to that nonprofit, I'll never find it. But I did my best to find out the money behind some of these groups. So the four we're going to talk about, there's a national group called State Voices, and they have a bunch of affiliates, and we'll talk about some of those. Well, one of those affiliates sent 1.5 million mailing pieces to the state of Kansas in 2022. And they sent 85 million to the whole U.S., which you think 85 million, that's a lot of millions. Well, in 2020, they sent 300 million nationally. It's just a mind-boggling number. And guess what? It's 2024. They have already sent 30,000. So 30,000 pieces, and we'll get back to talking about that in a minute. So then Blueprint Kansas, and actually Aaron knew this, or somebody that came up to me knew that this was the wrong place to register to vote, so we'll talk about that. So this is a lefty group trying to collect names for registered voters in Kansas. The Mainstream Coalition in the Johnson County area created something called the Voter Network, which is registering people and actually collecting their ballot information right online because people are voluntarily doing that. So that's working against us. And both Blueprint Kansas and Mainstream Coalition would be called capacity building. These are capacities the left has that then all their other lefty groups use to do their work. And so it's just a service that's available. They don't have to do anything for it. Our groups to have no way to do the same thing. We don't have that capacity built from other people. And then we're going to talk about Kansas Health Foundation and this big thing called integrated voter engagement. And I've been able to document about almost $9 million they spent since 2017 on that. Now, why do nonprofits want to register voters? Well, so there's these tax-exempt organizations. They're often funded by billionaires or millionaires, and they don't really target a group that's exclusively left or right. They want to just know that they're going to beat the odds. So if they know a group's like 55% Democratic and 45% Republican, they're going to go after that group because they're going to win over time. So they're not. It's not a pure play, but if they do this enough, if you send out this 1.5 million pieces, and you have a 10% break there, you can get more votes from that. So that's why the left is doing this. So this group called State Voices, a friend in Topeka sent me this diagram saying that they had made, what's the number here? This group collectively made 140 million voter contacts in the 2022 election. They don't really define what voter contacts means, but at the time I was actually studying 1.5 million voter contacts in the state of Kansas. And so the box here in the middle called Voter Participation Center and Center for Voter Information was 1.5 million of that 1.7 million. So, but there's still 200,000 voter contacts. I don't know exactly how they're counting, but I have a lot of them I suspect. So the black lines coming out of here. So this is State Voices, and the black lines then point to different national organizations, and that second tier then provides services to nonprofits. So for example, RE Power used to be called Wellstone Action up in Minnesota. They're a very progressive group that train in progressive everything up in Minnesota. And Kansas Health Center, Health Foundation, and all these other Kansas organizations went up there for training. So this is a case that State Voices indirectly provided that service to these Kansas nonprofits. And the ones in red we're going to talk more about, but I want to highlight the one at the upper left, Protect Democracy. So it's a national group. They're somehow tied to State Voices. They're active in voter registration and getting out the vote in many states. But they bought Kansas voter registration data 68 times from 2020 to 2022, including during Value Them Both, they bought it weekly for like 34 weeks. I don't know what they did with the data, but it cost $200 a shot, so they were well funded. But there's external groups outside the state of Kansas that can do things with data we can't do because we just don't have the resources. We can't do the data science things that they're probably doing with the data. So let's go on to these groups called Voter Participation and Center for Voter Information. Well, in 2018, you've heard of Sam Bankman-Fried, the cryptocurrency guy that's been in a lot of trouble. Well, his mom, of all people, Barbara Fried, was at Stanford University professor, and in 2018, she wanted to get all her friends in the Stanford area they had a group called Mind the Gap, to funnel money basically to Voter Participation Center and Center for Voter Information to change Congress. So their stated goal was to change Congress. And so that's where they started sending out these mailings. What's a little weird about this, get my years right, in 2022, I got on their websites and every link that I could, I pushed on that button. And it turned out there was on both their sites, they had a little box called the red box, and I clicked on that link and it told me what they were doing this year. Well, since then I found an academic paper called Red Boxing, and what they're basically doing is telegraphing to the recipients what they're doing. And so they're technically a nonprofit, technically they're not coordinating, but if you know where to go on their site in 2022, they were telling people exactly what they were doing. And so that's actually how I put this map together of the whole United States. So it's like mind-boggling that they sent out 8 million pieces in Arizona last year, probably against Kerry Lake. So, but let me show you an example of their mailings. I call it a push survey. And so this particular one, these are kind of hard to read, but this was sent out from an address in Topeka that sure looks like it's a suite number in a building. Well, that's a post office box number, and they put these things in so you think it is, but it really isn't. It isn't a separate organization. And so on this particular one, they asked 3 separate questions trying to compare Governor Kelly with Derek Schmidt. So the first question was, so who is likely to support tax cuts for the people? Well, of course, in this survey, they said Laura Kelly was going to support tax cuts and Derek wouldn't. And then the next question, and I don't remember any discussion about banning books about the Holocaust and the Civil Rights Movement. But who's going to ban those books? Well, Derek Schmidt, again, was going to ban those books, and Laura wasn't. And the last one is really kind of crazy, and let me get the exact words here. It's they were repairing sewage systems to keep sewage systems out of clean water, basically. And so they're claiming that Derek wouldn't take action on that, and Governor Kelly would. And I got to read this bottom line is, They say a candidate's position is sometimes more complicated than yes or no, and we have done our best to request each candidate, to represent each candidate in a fair and representable way. I would claim these were not fair at all. And they sent out, I don't know the exact number for this particular mailing, but they sent out a lot of them. This next slide, they really broke it up into 4 phases. So early on this time of year, they're sending out voter registration forms to 17-year-olds. Well, you can't buy lists of 17-year-olds from the election office because they don't have them yet. Well, at least most of them. So they're trying to register 17-year-olds, and then they're going to go to a phase where they're going to have you request an advance ballot, and then the final push is they're going to do a get out the vote mailing. And of the 1.5 million, 1 million of those were for get out the vote. So they broke that down by details. So in 2024, they have already sent out about 30,000 pieces, 29,000 and change, to 5 Kansas counties. Well, who could they help the most in which counties? Well, those counties are exactly what's in the 3rd Congressional District. So they're doing this to help Sharice Davids. And it's going to be real interesting to see with what's going on in the 2nd District now, with that being an open seat. I bet they add the 2nd District in the next round of mailings, but we'll see. So Kansas, to their credit, Secretary of State Scott Schwab, the Johnson County District Attorney, they went to court to try to block them because they were sending out pre-filled out forms to all these people. And there's actually a lot of mistakes in there. So when the election office gets them, they have to sort out the mistakes. And a lot of these are re-registrations, and they don't really worry about duplicates. So we went to federal court trying to block this. Well, of course, it got overturned. And to their credit, they've actually appealed it. So it's currently in the U.S. Court of Appeals. And it's really an issue of who can control election administration, because should an external group be able to fill out those forms and cause headaches for the election administrators, or should they work through the election office to do that? But right now and this year, they've actually taken on a different tack. Instead of filling out everything, they're just putting everything but the name on it. They don't really care who lives at that address. They just want who, and they've targeted that. There's discussions in other states. They actually think they're targeting some non-citizens living at some of these addresses to get them to register to vote. I didn't mention that in the Virginia, I'm on some national calls that in Virginia, they only targeted the 2 toss-up districts in Virginia. And there again, they're thinking they're trying to get some non-citizens to vote there. So this is something to look forward to. I only found out about this group because my wife got one, and it sat on my desk until January after the election. I said, okay, it's time to research this, and I had no idea where it was going to take me after that. So little clues sometimes can turn into some big things. So in 2018, Brian McClendon was going to run against Scott Schwab for Kansas Secretary of State. And along the way, he teamed up with the Douglas County Clerk, Jamie Shrew, and one other person to form what's called Blueprint Kansas. Well, that whole blueprint book we just talked about was how Colorado was turned from red to blue. So the whole Blueprint Kansas name should be a little bit offensive because that's exactly what they're trying to do. But they always print on all their official documents they file, it's Blueprint Kansas doing business as kansasvotes.org. So yes, on the bottom of their webpage, they do put their name Blueprint Kansas, but you have to really be looking at the site very thoroughly to pick up on that. So anyway, we're going to talk about the $700,000 they spent to register mostly young people in Kansas, then all Democratic groups in Kansas. And then we'll talk about the $1.3 million of this person-to-person contact to register voters, and then we'll get to the Kansas Health Foundation. So there was a Washington Post article, let's see if I get my years right here. So it would have been right after the 2018 election where this guy named Davis Hammett, who's responsible for Loud Light, basically wrote an article saying how he had come to Kansas from Florida, and he was adopting Kansas as his state, and he was going to focus on registering young people to vote. So it's almost like he got this ad in the Washington Post saying, send me money for what I'm doing. So he got quite a bit of exposure from that. But what kansasvotes.org does is they've become the nonprofit in the middle, that you as a citizen, you can contact your election office, or you can go online to the Secretary of State's website and register to vote. But the left, for some reason, gets really annoyed that they had to put their driver's license on it. And for whatever reason, the HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, allows you to use a federal form to register without a driver's license on it. So what they did is they came up with this website where you put in your information, they create the form for you, and they email it to your county clerk. But they're using the federal form. So, but the problem with that is we really don't know what they're doing with that data. And I'll give you some numbers down the road. They can take that data and then use that to shepherd other voters to the polls, I call it. So you go to their site, you fill out your name, and like I said, they send it in. So just to test this system, I actually re-registered myself recently, just to understand exactly how it works. You have to sign with either a stylus or a pen. But the thing is, so then I did an open records request to my election office to see what they sent them, just to see, so I knew exactly what they're doing. The aspect ratio is wrong, so they've actually scrunched the signatures a lot narrower than what they were originally. And why that doesn't interfere with the signature match, nobody can answer that question, but it's just curious how that works. And then this is the list of, I'm not quite obsessive compulsive enough to say I found all these individually. You can go out on Google with right search and say what sites refer to this site. But these are all the sites that refer people to the kansasvotes.org site to register people to vote. So on the left of this side is mostly Democratic organizations. There's some school things in the middle. For whatever reason, about 10 or 12 Kansas counties do that without proper disclaimers that this is really a nonprofit, it's really not a government site. And so they're collecting names that they can then use however they want to in the election process. So let's go on to the Mainstream Coalition. And part of integrated voter engagement is to make elections nonstop. That you do this every year. You don't do, so like even last year, which was local elections, you do the same things every year, even years and odd years, and it just never stops. And so this capacity that the voter network is creating through voter to voter, they're actually doing that. So they're just nonstop, well-funded progressive activism. And we're going to see that for whatever reason, the bulk of their funding comes from healthcare organizations, healthcare foundations. So Mainstream, for the longest time, like I said, they were active in Johnson County for 30 years. They decided right before COVID to change their name to the Voter Network. So Voter Network, I'm not going to think about Mainstream. I know Mainstream, but most people that know about Mainstream don't know that the Voter Network was really one of their projects. But then just to confuse everybody even more, 2 years later, they spun it off as a separate organization, and they changed their name back to Mainstream Civic Engagement. But now we have a different organization called the Voter Network, and they try to be active in across the state for cities of 5,000 or more. And so the left arrow here is they have a site called kansasballot.org where they try to put on the ballots for everybody in any city over 5,000 with all the candidates and with information about the candidates for them to vote. And the thing that kind of bugs me is you actually go on that page and you can fill out your ballot, and then you can either have it emailed to you or they'll send you reminders with your selections. Well, I sent them a request. You can't do open records because they're a nonprofit. I said, what do you do with that data? And they just won't answer that question. So they actually have actual ballots that people have filled out and are likely voting that way in a computer somewhere that they can use however they want because it's in their terms of use. So that's just very bothersome. The middle thing that the Voter Network provides are just election resources. One of the things they do is for certain churches, they have sermons, like four weekly sermons about tending the civic soil, they call it. And so our side would be very hesitant to do that, but they don't seem to have that problem. And then this voter to voter, kind of their little mantra here is peer pressure with a purpose. And so that's quite telling. But if you're in this voter to voter, it's called relational organizing. And what they're saying here, pick 10 of your friends and you go online to their site. And so you put these 10 friends in, and so they will connect it up to your voter history, so they can then personalize. You know, if you don't vote very much, you could be advised to give them more hand-holding to get them to vote. If they vote all the time, you can just leave them alone. But they're really good about dates. You will personally get a contact to register to vote. You'll personally get a contact to request an advance ballot. You'll personally get some feedback. This is for people you know. And then on the side, and there's a little thing here that says there will help. Besides this, there's an automatic computer system that's sending reminders to the same people. So right now they have, as of yesterday, 487 teams with almost 2,000 ambassadors looking for mostly low propensity voters. We don't have anything like that on our side. I believe many of these teams are very ineffective, but I also believe there's some very large teams from some nonprofits they're working with, and those are probably very effective. And this is one of the things that I think, since it kind of came from Johnson County, and I think it's probably influencing Johnson County more than the other areas of the state. But they do claim, you'll see here in a few slides, that they claim to be in like 90 some counties. So let's talk about Kansas Health Foundation, which I believe is right across the street to the south. So let me go on a little bit of a background here. So people have used the term civic engagement to talk about voter registration. Well, somehow in the health community, civic engagement turned into civic health, turned into a social determinant of health, so it's something that's affecting your health. And now it's healthcare, and now it's voting. And so this was actually an article about from a year ago. It's actually not a technical article; it's a commentary in the New England Journal of Medicine about healthcare facilities are underutilized as vehicles for voter registration. So there's a big push in the healthcare industry to have voter registration. On the way down here today, this same group, I don't know if you've heard of the EPIC system. EPIC system is your chart when you go to the doctor. EPIC and Cerner are the two big. They just added a module for voter registration to the EPIC system, so when you go to the doc, they can fill that out and then give you reminders on whether you've registered to vote. Then later on, it's just kind of incredible. So, I mean, I used to work at a hospital, research. I had all these badges on everything, but they will give you a badge that as you interact with a patient at any given, there's some time, you say, here, take this badge and use this QR code, and you can go online and register to vote. And so they started this a couple years ago, and they've got $200,000 of dark money funding so far that I found. And then in the state of Kansas, for whatever reason, the Kansas Hospital Association and let me get the other name, Community Care Network of Kansas, which they have like maybe almost 3 dozen health clinics and health systems. They're pushing this for their clinics to register people to vote. I don't know how widespread it is, but that's what they say that they're doing. So what you could do is, I know this happened to me a few years ago. They came in they used to just weigh you and get your height, but they haul you in a little room. They ask you all these private questions like, do you feel safe at home? And I thought that was kind of a crazy question. So now they're going to haul you in a little room and say, are you registered to vote? And then get you on a list to vote that. So let's see. So the Kansas Health Foundation, I just got this online just in the last week. So there's 4 articles that I got online and have online now. So one of them is just talking about what voter engagement is and where it came from, and I'll only briefly talk about that today. But it goes back 10 years, and it goes back to that Colorado model 15 years ago. And then it's primarily financed by the healthcare foundations in Kansas and the Kansas City, or both Wichita and the Kansas City area. We'll go over some of the nonprofits that are involved, and then finally talk about what its impact is on Kansas. So you probably can't read all these slides, but on this slide right here, they start. That's a capacity. So if you read what it says in the middle, these are the elements you need to help build long-term power for community. So you basically can control your government if you have all these capacities. And so if you're nonprofit organizations, you want to build these capacities so you have some of each. So one of them is to register the vote. One of them is get out the vote. You protect the vote. I'll just develop strong leaders, public persuasion, hold the electeds accountable. So you want something in each one of these little spokes is what I'm calling them. And so they've been fairly successful. We'll see that here in a minute. They've been fairly successful in doing that. But let's back up a second. So in January 2017, there's a group called the Funders Committee for Civic Participation published this diagram on their website. Okay? Well, the Funders Committee for Civic Participation really is a fiscal sponsored of a dark money place called the Neo Philanthropy Group. So again, this is all dark money behind all of this. And the Kansas Health Foundation became a member of this group like in 2017, the same year that Arabella became a member of that group. So they're connecting with all the people at the national level that are working with dark money. Okay, so for whatever reason, Kansas Wesley Medical Center here in Wichita was sold like in 1985. It was a nonprofit, and they sold it to a for-profit HCA. So they took that money from that sale and they created 2 nonprofits. So one of them later, it's been renamed a couple times, is now the Kansas Health Foundation. The other one is the United Methodist Health Ministry Fund. That fund is also involved in these same things. For whatever reason, I don't know, they should be filing IRS 990s and they're not. I've requested one directly from them, but I've not heard back yet. So they're doing something. They have a lot less money than the Kansas Health Foundation, but they're a player. And then the two in the Kansas City area is the same story, that Health Midwest was sold, again, to HCA. They took the money and they split it up because they had facilities on both sides of the state line. I think they had this battle. Our Attorney General fought at this. So there's the REACH Foundation that's in Overland Park and the Health Forward Foundation in Missouri. But anyway, so those three foundations are sponsoring this integrated voter engagement. And if you look at the numbers, Kansas Health Foundation has put in like $6 million over the last 7 years or so. The REACH has only had less than $1 million, 810,000, and the Missouri groups put in almost $2 million. So they've kind of formed a coalition of these groups to sponsor these activities. And so these are some of the people that have gotten, some of the groups have gotten the money. And because this is so small, it's available. Let me just go to the next slide here, so the Kansas Health Foundation, the green arrows are money flows. The bigger the arrow, the more the money they got. And so there's some, like the ACO gets money, Kansas Votes got some money, Loud Light got money, the Voter Network got some money. So those are kind of the big players. El Centro, actually they're working, I thought they were only Wyandotte County, but they do stuff in Johnson County and even Shawnee County. There's a More 2 group that I thought it was only Kansas City, Missouri, but guess what? They were doing the school district elections in Johnson County in the fall, so they're on both sides of the state line. I don't really know what they do. There's a group called Kansas Appleseed, and they do some very good work feeding people, but some of these secular groups always connect it with voting. And so in particular, the liberal area group that's called LACE here on the lower left, during COVID, they actually had a press release about this, that they were putting out food kits and cleaning kits boxes to help the people of Southwest Kansas, and by gosh, they included voter registration forms both in English and Spanish. So that's how integrated voter engagement works. They do a needed service, but it's always in the context of voter registration and getting people to vote. And so let's talk about the impact on Kansas and how are we doing. Should speed up a little bit here. Okay, so on the integrated voter engagement model, they have everything covered. They have at least one, if not more, for every one of those spokes. In particular, the Kansas Leadership Institute, which is run by, they're very closely connected to the Kansas Health Foundation. They control leadership in the state of Kansas, which kind of influence how these people think. And so they can check off the boxes. They really don't need to do more capacity building. The big unknown on integrated voter engagement is everybody's funding runs out early next year. And so will there be any more funding to continue this on? And so that's what I'm looking for. I have no idea what the answer to that is. We talked about kansasvotes.org. To their credit, they put stats right online about what they've done. So they've registered 85,000 people, almost 86,000, and they've sent out about 105,000 advanced ballots. And so that's a list of names they can use however they want because they own that data and then they send it on to the county clerks. So we really don't know what they're doing with that data. And then the Voter Network, at one time they admitted they had 25, maybe this is a couple years ago, they had 2,500 ambassadors in 92 counties and they had made contacts with 34,000 people. So either that 34,000 number or that 85,000 number is much greater than the 22,000 number, which is what Laura Kelly won by. So they have enough votes that they can control most statewide elections with just what they're doing. And so a year ago, there's a brilliant guy that used to work at the Capitol Research Center. He's moved on to another job now. They wrote a story called Bluing Kansas. I told him what Kansas Health Foundation was doing and some of the numbers. Well, Hayden had already seen this happen in other parts of the country, so he wrote the high-level story for me, and I've just basically filled in the dots since then. But what I did was I went back from 2016 and looked at voter registration numbers by year. And so there's a lot of numbers here. But what I'm looking for is there a Democratic advantage every year? And so, for example, so I used 2016 because in 2016, Trump won, and in our county, Kevin Yoder won for Congress, so everything was kind of copacetic in 2016. But what's happened since then? So in 2018, because of these things that are going on that I've talked about, the Democrats had a net gain of 10,000 voters in Johnson County. By 2020, it increased to 29,000. By 2022, it increased by 41,000. And I have some charts to show who they're targeting with that. So if you compare that, the second set of numbers here is for Sedgwick County. Well, the Democrats actually lost 1,400. The Republicans gained 1,400 over the same time period. I don't show it here, but I did look at Douglas County. Douglas County gained 8,000. So 8,000 and 41,000 is almost 50,000 voters between those two counties that the Democrats have gained. But most of the rest of the state, if you look at the bottom numbers here, they were only up 6,000 statewide. So many Kansas counties actually turned redder during the same process. So that's good. So these diagrams are a little bit complicated, but let me try to go through them. So there's a gray line here at the top. That is just the total number of registered voters. So how many? So you buy the voter list. You say how many are 18, how many are 19, how many are 20, all the years up to 105, and you just plot that graph. How many people by age? And so the black line is another. Each voter's marked as active and inactive, and the inactive voters probably they don't know where they live, and so they probably shouldn't be voting. But we don't have good checks and balances on those right now. So that area between the gray line and the black line represents how many people are inactive that we really need to scrutinize more, but I've never been successful in having people do that. The red line was actually the line from the election. And so you can see this area in here represents 400,000 people that did not vote in 2020. It's a huge number of people that did not vote statewide. Okay, so this is what drives Loud like crazy, because guess what? This area over here, the youth, is one of the bigger areas that they can target. So that's why they're targeting that area right now. So this shows 2020. So it's the same thing on the left, but the red curve actually shows what happened in 2022 in the governor's race. People just didn't show up to vote. The gray and the black curves just kind of shift over, but especially at younger ages, the older people kind of showed up, but the turnout just wasn't there. So what I did then is you can then break this down by political party and then look at what's going on by political party. So this is the Kansas one. Again, I did the presidential year. And so young Democrats aren't voting, young Republicans aren't voting. And guess what? Unaffiliated or unaffiliated, I'm not sure how you get these people to vote. A lot of the unaffiliated just don't vote in most elections. So they keep talking about the independent vote. Well, there are some, but there's almost as many that aren't voting too. So let's look at Johnson County from 2016 through 2022. So what I want to point out is look for the gray and black lines to be going up. Don't kind of ignore the red lines. We don't really care what the turnout was. I just want to know what was the voter registration by party. So we really want to compare the Democrats against the Republicans. And just for fun, I then added stuff here at the top about what's going on, all this integrated voter engagement and other things going on in the state. But let me just go through this. So you can see on the left, it's just they keep increasing. And so by 2022, they had gained 50,000 voters. Republicans had gained 10,000. So that's a net difference of 41,000 voters in Johnson County. And statewide, it was only just under 7,000. So most of the gain was Johnson County alone. So I believe all this money they've been spending from dark money is affecting Johnson County a lot, but not so much in the rest of the state. But you could see that in Johnson County in 2022, Jerry Moran statewide, he lost in Johnson County. Scott Schwab lost his home county. Amanda Atkins lost by almost the same margin that they had been increasing. So it's almost coincidental there. But anyway, Johnson County, we have problems. I'm not sure how we get out of it without a long-term approach to doing some of the things that they're doing. And then this slide will just repeat itself, but we don't really need to look at that. So the take-home message is we're really being overwhelmed with progressive political money, mostly from out of state, many progressive organizations, and then these nonprofits, these progressive organizing groups are trying to register voters and get out the vote a lot better than we are. And so this is really done mostly outside the Democratic Party. You can't blame the Democratic Party per se, but they're lefty groups. And we need capacity building. We need to build some of this infrastructure in place so our groups have something to use when they do need to talk to people. And we need a huge offense on get out the vote. Those low propensity voters, we know that they're there on our side. We need to do a better job about getting them out wherever they are. So that's it, and I'll take questions. Yes, I guess. Oh.
Get the Pachyderm members first for questions.
Sure.
So when you're holding the mic,
just get right into it so people back here. So we'll start with I've always been under the impression that a 503c nonprofit organization was not allowed to take any political actions. And so we found all of these organizations. Isn't there someone that they can be turned into for some kind of corrective action?
Our side believes that, but they push it to the limit on what they can get away with, and there's obviously very little enforcement by the IRS. So they use both C3s and C4s, and all, well, let's go back. So they're doing voter registration now. They use both their C3 and their C4 to do that. To get the advanced ballots, they'll do the C3 and C4, and even to get out the vote. But they have slightly different messages. So on a C3, as long as you don't mention a candidate's name, and it's an educational piece of some sort, you can get, so their educational pieces for voter registration says your neighbor's voting and you're not. Why are you not voting? And so that's an example of a piece they can send out with C3 money, but they've pushed it to the limits, and there's some national organizations that are trying to do something about it, but so far we haven't. Yeah, but our side is obeying the rules like you're describing. They are not. So we don't have a level playing field, which is one of the reasons I put this talk together.
Okay, it's 1 o'clock now, so if you have to go somewhere, go ahead and leave. We're going to ask a few more questions.
Sorry I went so long.
Do you have any information on the plan that Biden has to organize college students and high school students to go out and register Democrats and voters? I've heard this name called the Climateers. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with Climateers, but what you described is actually, there was an executive order promoting access to voting that was supposed to affect all federal agencies. And so what you're describing was only one federal agency. And so they're doing this at all levels of the federal government, trying to turn those places into registering voters. So there are some that are using like work-study money and stuff like that you're describing. There are people at the national level who are trying to push back on that, but I'm not sure how successful they are right now. It's being discussed. There's people that more powerful than me that are talking about it.
Okay. One last question back here.
Do you have any sense for how much taxpayer dollars get funded into these elections indirectly? So to be clear, something like an organization that maybe the taxpayer dollars go for birth control, but if money's fungible, and so then it goes into some sort of policy group, or even a more blatant example, we send our money to school districts to educate our kids, and they hire lobbyists and things like that.
I don't have a good sense for that right now. At the federal level, there is a database that I just can't find time to get a hold of, but it's called usspending.org or gov, where they actually tell you what the government is sending money to these different organizations, and then you can connect that with the IRS 990 and find out a little bit more about what they're doing, but I have not done that yet.
Okay, Earl F, everybody. Great meeting.
And I'll take questions later if they want to.